Hey friends, welcome to the Cut for Time podcast for this week. This is Pastor Clay coming to you before the episode starts. I want to apologize for the audio quality today. When Eric and I record these episodes, we just start recording and then walk away, and we didn't notice that halfway through the conversation, Eric's mic pack died. Thankfully, my mic grabbed all the audio that we needed for today, but Eric's voice will be a little quieter than usual, and we'll have that fixed for next time. Thanks, enjoy the episode. Well, welcome to this week's edition of the Cut for Time podcast here at the Canton United Methodist Church. My name is Pastor Clay. I'm here with Eric, and today we're going to be digging into the story from Matthew chapter 8 about the centurion and the servant and how Jesus was able to heal even in the midst of everyone thinking that he shouldn't have done it. And so just dealing with our sense of community and our sense of looking out for each other.
So, listen to it a few times. The message. You opened with how welcome you have felt here since coming during the pandemic, which I cannot imagine. That would be a struggle for me. And I can imagine how hard that has been for you.
Yeah.
How have you, or like, what are some specific instances that you have felt welcome in this place or welcome in this church community?
Yeah. So the biggest thing has just been the fact that I can get passes to sports, because there is no earthly reason why, when passes, every athlete's given 4 passes for every sporting event. And like, when you look at our families and of our athletes and stuff and of our youth, they could use all 4 passes. And to share a pass with someone that just moved to town, that is just new here still, has been really touching. And like the fact that I've been able to go to almost every home event I wanted to go to, except for the homecoming football game. Because I knew there was no way I'd find a pass for that. And then being able to live stream it and whatever and still watch and be engaged, that's just been huge. I mean, that could have been an opportunity where I would have been felt like a very outside type person. But I was included. I mean, and always welcomed into sporting events. I've made connections with people beyond this church because I was at sporting events. I mean, I had a conversation with a family from Canton Lutheran that they have been here before for certain things, but they're just like, "Hey, you're the Methodist pastor, right?" And we just sat and talked for half an hour between between ball games and stuff, and that only happened because someone from this church shared a pass with me, and when they had no right. They didn't. No real reason. They had every right not to. So that's been huge. The way that certain things I've wanted to do in leadership have been received has been welcoming. They really say that, especially when you're following health and when you're following a pastor that's gone well, like I am with following Pastor Steve, to really take your first year and not change anything at all.
Sure.
Which, there are things that are still in the back of my head that will be coming down the pipe when I've been here for a year.
Sure.
But also, we did the goal stuff. We did some goal setting and some really naming our priorities in ministry together as leadership team. We're reading a book together, which is new for you guys. And they actually did the reading.
Sure.
I didn't know what to expect coming into that meeting a couple weeks ago. And then we sat down and I said, "Okay, what are your thoughts?" And people started chiming in. I was like, "Okay, this is an okay thing that we're going to actually do together, and hopefully learn from and glean some new insights about how we move forward together as pastor and church." So those couple of things have been incredibly helpful for us.
Sure. How has, because you've moved to a couple of different churches.
Yep.
Moving from Brookings to Burke to Canton. How was, and Burke's a little bit different too, because you moved closer to your home.
Yeah.
How was that but the Burke transition was also not during a pandemic. Like, how was that different from Brookings to Burke than from Burke to Canton? I mean, were you able to do more stuff right away? Were you welcomed differently? Like, what was that experience like?
Yeah, we had this weird situation where the church needed more time to deal with some deferred maintenance in the parsonage. And so when we moved to town, our stuff moved into the garage of the parsonage. And then Lindsay and I went to a church camp for a week. Like we were on tap to dean this camp, and we weren't going to. I mean, the Burke and Herrick churches knew that was going to be the case. And so our first night in town, we loaded our stuff into the garage. We went to Mom and Dad's, which was 8 miles away over in Gregory, but a member took us out for supper at the one restaurant in Burke, which was awesome. It was prime rib night, which was kind of
fantastic.
Really good night to be at Stella's in Burke, South Dakota, if you ever have the chance. And so then when we got back from camp, I called one person. That one person called 4 people, and a team of people moved our stuff into the house for us.
Wow.
Because when you're a pastor, there's usually a moving company involved, and so the moving company moves your stuff. But because we had to be delivered to the garage so that they could spend that whole week working on things in the parsonage, we were able to just leave our stuff. They were able to do their work. We were at camp anyway, so it didn't matter. And then we just moved in a week later. Here was different because we chose to move ourselves. We were able to have some really good friends help us move our stuff into the parsonage. We had a team. The team in Burke was amazing. Like, we got loaded up so fast, and then we got here, and it was the Laubach boys and Sheldon Hofeld from Celebrate Church and a buddy of mine from Beersford and us, and we just moved our stuff in.
Wow.
It was that was different, but it was still fine. The pandemic has changed so much, and us moving ourselves was different and weird, but really not being able to then shake the hands of the people that helped us move stuff, because we don't shake hands right now, except for Sheldon, who hugged me, which fine. That's just who he is as a person, and that's okay. But you're just standing there just okay, thanks.
Right.
Just feels so weird. And if you're listening to the audio, I'm waving, which is not how you really, thank someone.
It's a good podcast.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah. Great for an audio show. That felt so weird to not be hey, thanks, and a hearty handshake. That's what we do in upper Midwestern land.
Right.
But then just, my first days in ministry, in Burke, my first days in ministry was, walking downtown and stopping in shops and saying, hey, I'm here now. It's great. And now a pandemic has hit, and, my first couple of days in ministry were in the office making phone calls and saying, hey, who are you?
Right.
And also I had a funeral. I had a graveside service on day -1 of my appointment to Canton.
Sure.
And then I had another graveside service a couple days later. And so the person I spent the most time with was Andy McCann, which, I love Andy. He's a great guy, but not who you want to spend your first days in ministry with. That's kind of a weird dynamic and a weird way to start ministry. But it was also just the cards that were dealt as pastors. You just have to, roll with the punches. And so the pandemic definitely changed how I approached everything, really. I mean, because, different people have different comfort levels. And I was going from an area where we had, before we moved to Canton, Burke, Gregory County had 1 case. That was 2 weeks before we moved, and we moved to Lincoln County where the numbers had been higher. We moved to Canton where they had had cases in town. And so trying to navigate who was comfortable with what. I mean, and graduation had just been paused and prom had just been canceled. And so everything's up in an uproar, and you're just okay, I don't know any of you, and I don't know what's going on. So but I understand that this is weird. So I don't know how to help in the situation, but I at least know what's going on as best as I can. But
sure.
It was just a whole mind shift of how to approach things and how to feel out who was comfortable with what. And the biggest thing that we did was we did these conversations in the fireside room where, we had 8 people sign up on either on Sign Up Genius or by calling the church office. And that's how I got to know a lot of people. By just sitting down and being distanced and being masked and, getting to know people from the nose up. And learn stories as best as possible and, kind of dig into ministry that way and hear people's ideas and their dreams and their frustrations and their joys about what the Canton United Methodist Church is and does in the community. And so, those were important questions to ask, and but I'm much more comfortable having those conversations on other people's turf. Because people are more comfortable when they're in their own space and they have this, I'm asking some kind of hard questions like what do we do here that you would love to see changed? What is that thing for you? And that can be a hard conversation to have when you have to come to this space.
Sure.
And it's different when you're detached from that and having that conversation. We just kind of had to power through and make it work. So
have you been able to do more things since you came in July?
Yeah, absolutely. I
mean, besides sporting events?
Right. Yeah. I mean, things have opened up. People have become more comfortable with me. The biggest thing was that we had a couple people that weren't comfortable doing the talk in the fireside room, but they called the church office and said, "Hey, would you come to my house?" Because they were letting me know what their comfort level was, and so I could meet them in that. And I had really good conversations with a couple of folks. And now things are opening back up more and more. Our ministerial association is back to meeting in person, which has been huge. That's been just such a great group to be a part of, and to learn more about the community through those people in that room has been awesome. I've bed down to Love Inc. a handful of times. I'm on the Love Inc. board now because Christy Carpenter was on it for a long time, but now she works for Love Inc., and so she had to come off the board. And Tom Gilman was the pastor on the board, but he, because of their term limits, he had to come off of it. And so Karen Brendis is like, "I'm looking for a Methodist and a pastor." And I was like, crap, I'm both of those things. No,
you're stuck.
What I really said was, she was looking for a Methodist and a pastor, and she's like, "I can kill two birds with one stone if you come on the board with me." And I was like, that's a great opportunity to be, to be new and just to get to know people. Not just Methodist people, but get to know people in Canton and be on something that's kind of public is huge for me to be newly in ministry and to be entrusted with a spot on the Loving board. I think I just think the world of that. And so that's taken me down to the Loving building a number of times for meetings with Karen, and I'm on the fundraising committee, and it's the 15th anniversary of Loving in Canton. So we're trying to do some kind of bigger things. And but yeah, I mean, a lot of doors have opened.
That's good.
Now. So
well, and I'm sure it's been tough too, because you came from a town of Burke is what,
600
yep. to a town of 3,000.
Yep.
That's a whole different dynamic
it's
too.
A very different dynamic.
I mean, not everyone doesn't know everyone in Canton.
Oh yeah.
No matter what you want to think. I mean, there's no way to know 3,000 people.
It has been very different, and it's a very different dynamic being in a larger area. I went from serving 3 churches to 2 churches to now 1. It's very freeing, but it's also just very different.
Yeah.
So, but it's good.
Yeah. So my next question was going to be, how does that tie into the story of the centurion and the slave and all of that?
Yeah.
How did go over that transition again, I guess.
Yeah. So basically the story of the centurion and the servant is that the centurion should not have cared about the servant at all. The centurion would have had the servant as property, basically. Right. And that's an unfortunate part of the world that was lived in at that time. That the servant had no rights, the servant had no standing, the servant was literally just another thing that the person owned. I mean, it was no different than owning a horse or an ox. It had the same level of status. And so the centurion should not have cared. It had no right to care whatsoever. Just like your new pastor moving to town in the midst of all of this stuff happening and all of this stuff not happening. I mean, there's no reason why families shared passes with me other than I asked and they had them available. I mean, I have been looked out for. in a way that, I've had to be looked out for in a way that there's no reason why I was able to do the things I was able to do, other than people from this church and people from this community looking out for me in the same way that the centurion looked out for the servant. So,
can you imagine being in that, in that time when the centurion, who is not a Hebrew, and shouldn't be talking to Jesus.
Yeah.
Jesus shouldn't be talking to him.
Yep.
Like, can you imagine that situation? I mean, or even as the slave. I mean, like, that whole story is just crazy if you think. I mean, if you really think about what was going on at the time.
Oh yeah, exactly. And like the fact that the servant wasn't actually there. I mean, he was paralyzed at home. Like, he was not coming out to do his servantly work. And so the centurion should have just, he says in scripture, I'm a person under authority. What he should have done in that moment was call the person above him and say, hey, this servant isn't working out.
Give me a new one.
He's paralyzed. I need a new one. Find me one now, and have, just put in a requisition form for a new servant,
right,
and get a new servant. But yet this centurion just defies all of that. And Jesus, as Jesus is wont to do, defies all of that. And it's crazy. The fact that this story happened is the most baffling thing about it to me. Yeah. And to be in the crowd and jaws had to have just dropped.
I mean, think about today when we'll just use this. I mean, Republican talks to a Democrat. I mean, essentially, it's not, I hope it's not that bad, but it really feels like that right now.
Yeah.
Like, people just get flabbergasted almost and call them names and how dare you deal, work with that person or whatever that might be.
Yep.
So how do we...
They're the enemy,
It's them against us. I mean, that's really what it feels like.
Yes.
So how do we take that story that's so blatantly obvious that it applies to today? Because, Jesus and the centurion should not have...
No.
Centurion should not have gone to Jesus.
Right.
And Jesus should not have helped him.
Yep.
How do we take that and put that into today's context? Like how do we look that, how do we get to the point where we don't care and we just treat them as people, as we all should?
Right. I think that part of it is, I think the starting point is having a hard conversation within ourselves and identifying who are those people to us, who are those ones that we deem unworthy of being heard, unworthy of being, the crowds would have had these assumptions about the centurion because, like I said on Sunday, he was the face of oppression to these people because he was the Roman authority and the Hebrew people just so badly wanted to be an independent nation. It wasn't going to happen. They tried. It didn't work. If you ever read the books of the Maccabean books, nerdy side point, there is a whole slew of books that the Catholics hold as scripture that we as Protestants do not.
I've got a million questions on that, but that's probably a different podcast.
It is definitely a different podcast. The easiest or the shortest answer I can give you is that when the Protestants were putting together their biblical canon, their list of the biblical books, they wanted an Old Testament that was completely in Hebrew and a New Testament that was completely in Greek. And so these books would have happened, these events would have happened in the intertestament period, but they were written in Greek, so they didn't necessarily count in the Old Testament. So it was just kind of this weird thing where they just threw them out. The Catholics hold these books to be canonical, and they tell a very important story of the Maccabean revolt, where the Hebrew people did try to raise up against their oppressors, and then they got smacked back down. And so they tried to be an independent nation, and they failed to win their independence. And so now the Romans, that's why the Roman centurions were there, in case someone got itchy again to be an independent nation, they could put it down way faster and more effectively, because that's kind of the Romans' thing. So this this centurion would have been like persona non grata to the Hebrew people, and for him to have the audacity to talk to Jesus, to ask of something from Jesus, whew, boy, and then for Jesus to actually grant it. I mean, like I said, jaws would have hit the floor in that crowd.
Mm-hmm.
It should have been a bigger deal than it was. For Jesus to say, I will come. I will throw every convention to the wind and make sure that this servant of yours is healed. And it's because of the faith that you have shown. Wow.
Holy crap.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so the step for us is to identify who would be the last person that we think is deserving, and address that and confront that in our own lives, and then try to model that and think of that every time that we have an interaction with someone that doesn't go well.
Mm-hmm.
When we have that interaction with someone that leaves us feeling kind of burnt, or that leaves us, just in some way that they don't deserve XYZ that they have. It's confronting those assumptions and those biases in ourselves, and then trying to, once we do that, identify that in the moment and say, okay, this is where this comes from. I need to do X to rise above it. It does. Right. Yeah.
What's easy.
Uh-huh.
It's a whole lot easier to just stay on
Mm-hmm.
this path where I don't have to talk to this person.
Right.
And ignore.
Yep. It's much easier to make a gut assumption about someone and then just have that be the defining narrative forever. Mm-hmm. But then you realize I judged them too harshly and too quickly, and I have to eat some crow.
Right.
That.
Well, you kind of talk about that too. Like, all of us have been on either side of that.
Yes, absolutely.
You feel like you've been mistreated
Mm-hmm.
because of what you believe in or what you've done.
Yeah.
Or
Yep.
you mistreat someone else because of what you think they are.
Yes.
You just have to ignore those biases. No matter how loud they are on Facebook or something like
Mm-hmm.
that. Like, you just need to ignore that.
Yep.
And still treat them like
Right. Yeah, exactly. We have to remember that, in the creation story, God looked at all of humanity and called it good, and not just good, but called it very good. We are created in the image of God, and we are created with an inherent and sacred worth, and that is for all people, regardless of our base judgments and regardless of our assumptions about who they are. At the end of the day, at the core of who they are, even if we think that they are the worst person ever and that we don't like them, that doesn't change the fact that they were made in the image of God and that they were made beloved in God's image.
what do you do with someone who has committed a heinous crime
Mm-hmm.
or something like that? Like,
Right.
how do you handle that one? You know what
Yeah. I mean, actions still have consequences. And in the case of someone that's committed a heinous crime, we can still see them as a beloved child of God who made a bad choice, because sin still is a thing. We still do the wrong things. We still identify the right thing and do the opposite. We still just think that we're right and do what we want to do. We still have that sin nature. Yes, we were made in the image of God, but yet the fall still happened. And we still live with the results of that. We still live with a sinful nature that wants to get ahead of someone else, and so we cut someone off in traffic, or maybe we're both up for a promotion, and we just kind of whisper something in the ear of someone that cares that they kick dogs or something. We have that ability. God gives us that free will to do good and evil. And so we have to. I think we have to recognize that our actions still have consequences, and that other people's actions still have consequences. That accountability is still a viable thing, but yet not walk in that tension, live in that tension where we don't lose the fact that they are still a beloved person of God, even if they have done X, Y, and Z. There's nothing that God can't redeem.
Mm-hmm.
So. It's hard though. I mean, it's incredibly difficult. I mean, I'm not going to say any of this is easy, but yeah.
Well, like you said, in the message, we're as divided now as we were, just as a country.
Yes.
Looking at the United States, and I know
Yep.
that Jesus did not come to save the United States.
Right.
He came to save the people.
Right.
So, but if you look at this as an example, because of everything you hear, I mean, it's blasting all over TV and everything else. Like,
right.
we're as divided now as we were at Civil War.
Yeah.
We're constantly fighting about the same thing for
Yeah.
170 years.
Yep.
So we obviously came back together at one point.
Yep.
We weren't this divided.
Mm-hmm.
In between there.
Right.
We can obviously get there.
Mm-hmm.
And it just takes.
Yep.
It takes a group of people that don't care about what people think.
Exactly. It takes a group. I mean, the Romans and the Hebrews, the Romans and the Jews, like they needed a Jesus that didn't care.
Right.
Like the Roman centurion came to Jesus. We don't know how he knew what he knew about Jesus, but we obviously know that he knew something about Jesus because he came to him and said, "Look, my servant is paralyzed. I need you to do something." And Jesus said, "I will come." And the Roman centurion knows that that's not an okay thing for Jesus to do, and says, "I'm not worthy of you to come to my house. Like Jews and Greeks don't get along. Like Jews and Romans don't get along. What are you doing?" Of course not. And Jesus still heals the centurion servant. Like the guy is still healed, and he's not even there. But yet Jesus did not care about how things were supposed to do, Jesus did not care about what he was supposed to do or how things were supposed to happen. Jesus just saw someone that was broken and brought healing. And you're absolutely right. We need to get to a point where, yes, we can have those divisions. Yes, we can see the world in radically different ways. But yet we have to see the bigger picture and really be okay with not everyone seeing the world the way that I do, or the way that I believe that you should. And really just being okay with, there are different opinions out there, and laying down our pathological need to be right and our pathological need to win. So
I feel like the way I see it, it's a prime opportunity for Christians to, in lack of a better term, take back some of the control that we once, not control, but just the impact that we once had.
Right.
It's,
absolutely.
You always hear statistics about churches declining and all that kind of stuff. This is our opportunity right now to be that unifying force that we should be.
Exactly. For us to look at the teachings and the patterns and the example of Jesus and actually live it and say to a world that is broken and say to a world that is polarized, like, there's bigger things that we need to be about, and Jesus is the bigger thing. We believe that Jesus is coming back. Like, we put our hope in his return, and we, because of that, we live in his way, and that way is radically different than the way that the world is right now.
We have a prime opportunity. And once again, like we've said multiple times in this podcast, we may think it's really bad right now, but if you think about what they had been going through with Roman occupation of Israel and all of that, we got nothing. I mean,
right, yeah.
We're fine.
Yeah, we're good. Like,
our issues are not, if that wasn't insurmountable, this isn't insurmountable. You know what we're dealing with now.
Yep. Yeah. That's crazy. But yet, I mean, we have just lost sight of, that's the thing that we're talking about being broken, is our societal connections and even our sense of community. I mean, because of COVID, because of having to, like I said at the start of the message last week, like in the earliest days of this pandemic, everybody freaked out, and it was every man for himself. Right. And, if you were in line, You grab your toilet paper, grab your Lysol, grab your mask, overwhelm the need for N95 masks. And like, we were terrified and we reacted horribly towards one another. The stories about Black Friday shopping were nothing compared to those early days of the pandemic where,
You saw videos of people just wrestling over stuff.
Yeah.
You'll be fine.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
You're right. I mean, it's essentially driven a divide in communities that we haven't been able to get back yet.
Exactly.
And it's taxing on
Mm-hmm.
they don't have that.
Yes.
No matter what people want to say, that interdependence is so much more productive than being.
Yes. Yep. Yeah, actually relying on each other and realizing the fact that we're, that we're more connected than we think we are, and that there's more that unites us than divides us, and emphasizing those things that unites us over top of the things that divide us. I mean, that's who Jesus was. I mean, he was, yes, he had the things that he had to say caused division because we didn't want to drop our assumptions and we didn't want to drop our worldview to adopt his. But like, when it came down to it, I mean, he wanted people united in this idea of serving each other, which is just so radically different from how we live our lives.
We all need to make an effort to.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
yeah.
Sounds cliche, but
No, it does, but yeah, it is right. One of my favorite movies is Pay It Forward. What Kevin Spacey says to Haley Joel Osment after he presents his idea that he's going to help, 3 people, and these 3 people are going to help 3 people. Like, you're making a big assumption on the goodness of humanity. And he's like, yeah, I am, because it's helping 3 people.
Right.
It's not insurmountable. And if it were to spread out, it would be, if you take the 3 and it becomes, 9, and 9 becomes 27, and then it just branches out from there. And just, if we were to make a different assumption about people or do something to enrich their lives in some way rather than tear them down or think that we're so much better, it could like you said, it could ripple out and just change things. So it could restore the brokenness that we see, and it could reset the narrative of just, I'm better than you and my way is right and yours is wrong.
I struggle with that.
Mm-hmm.
I do.
Yeah.
I mean, I have my understanding, and I don't know why anyone else would think any differently.
Right. I think we all struggle with that. I have a way I see the world, and I want everyone else to see the world that way.
Life would just be easy.
That'd be great. That'd be awesome if you just realize how right I am. Gosh. Yeah, get on board, people. Mm-hmm. And I have a way that I approach Scripture that, I believe to be, through prayer and discernment, the right way to approach Scripture. Others don't approach Scripture that way. And rather than just writing them off or blowing them off or just, scoffing and rolling my eyes, entering into the hard conversation of, okay, where are you coming from? Where are you getting this? Where, how is the Spirit leading you in this? That can overcome that can make all the difference. But like you said, we don't like hard. We like easy, and we want instant gratification, and like I said, we have a pathological need to be right and to win.
Well, I hope this reaches someone and
Yeah.
Makes that impact with just treating others with the same respect that
Right.
you want to be treated with.
Yeah, absolutely.
So next week, what do we got on tap?
Yeah, so next week we're going to deal with probably the hardest thing for me to deal with in this whole series is just the toll that this pandemic has taken on our mental health. None of us have come out of this thing completely fine. And we're not even out of this thing. None of us have endured this thing and been completely fine. I mean, I listen to a lot of podcasts, and I feel like half of them are sponsored by Talkspace, which is an online counseling thing. And one of the things that they point is that this thing is so popular that they're recruiting counselors in all 50 states to help deal with the client load because people are not okay. This has been really hard. You look at the studies that, the effect on student mental health of being out of school for that long and being away from people for that long. I went, pastorally, I went through a situation in my previous appointment where a young man killed himself. And, the community hadn't been to, the kids had not officially been together since school had gotten out. And so how did we do ministry in the midst of that? It had to, again, because of COVID, had to be very different. But also, it was a necessary thing for us to be present as pastors to this community of young people that, they lost a friend. And none of us have made it through this thing completely okay. And we have to be able to name that and not gloss over that and realize that telling forth our struggle with that part of things can be a cathartic thing for us, can be a thing that leads to healing. So we're going to deal with a story in Scripture where Jesus heals two blind people. And Jesus tells them, as he has in other stories, not to tell anybody. And these two blind guys that receive their sight do the absolute opposite, and they tell everybody. And words about Jesus spreads. And, as a result, more and more people came to Jesus looking for healing. And I think that if we were to be honest about our mental states and the fact that we're not okay, could lead to other people being confident and comfortable enough to name that too. And so that's what we're going to deal with on Sunday. It's not going to be easy. I've procrastinated my tail off today because I don't want to write the sermon. But it's going to be, I think it has the potential to be the most healing part of this whole series. So just, we're not okay, and that's okay. And then just, I really want to, looking at ways to share resources for us to really get the help that we need if we're in that position of needing help. So that's kind of where we're going on Sunday. It is going to be heavy. I have a lot of trepidation when it comes to writing this sermon, just because it will force us to face very uncomfortable truths about what the last year of life has been like. And the fact that we're back in March and there are people making light of it. There was a joke that was shared on Facebook, where we're just going to let March happen again after how it treated us last year. Because it was the month last year where everything kind of went off the rails, and we're still not recovered from it, And so here we are on the precipice of the month of March again. Here we are, almost, it'll be March 7th when everything kind of shifted on March 17th. But we're in the ballpark of everything, of it being a year since everything had to change. And just, there's the question, the thing that kind of came to my mind just now is that, in Parks and Rec, Leslie Knope talks about, are you better off than you were a year ago? And if we're going to be honest about the answer, are we?
That's a pretty easy answer in my opinion.
Yeah, I hear you. I feel the same way. So that's kind of where we're heading.
That'll be good.
Yeah, I think so.
Cool. Well, thanks for joining this week's podcast. Please join us again on Sunday, 10, in person or online. And then you can also hear the message later that afternoon, or join us back here for our next Cut to Time podcast. Thanks for joining us.